The research station floated in the cold void of space, its sensors scanning the endless darkness. It was a routine mission, something the scientists had done countless times before. They were searching for new planets, worlds that could be studied, maybe even settled one day. But today, something unexpected appeared on their screens. Professor Excel, a veteran scientist of the Galactic Union, leaned forward, his four eyes narrowing. The data on his screen made no sense. The probe had just detected a Class 14 Deathworld. "Run the scan again," Cell ordered, his voice calm but firm. His assistant, a young researcher named Vera, hesitated. "Sir, we already ran it twice. The readings are the same." Zell's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. A Class 14 Deathworld, the highest level of planetary danger ever recorded. Planets like these were rare. They were filled with extreme weather, deadly creatures, and unstable environments. No intelligent life could exist on such a world. And yet this planet was full of life. Not just plants and animals, but cities, energy signals, and even radio transmissions. Cell's mind raced. This wasn't just a dangerous world. It was a world with an advanced civilization. Vira whispered, "Sir, should we report this to the Council?" Cell nodded. Immediately. A meeting of minds. The Galactic Union's High Council gathered within hours. The news spread quickly, and representatives from dozens of species came together to discuss the discovery. The large hall was filled with voices, some excited, others afraid. "This is impossible," shouted a reptilian ambassador. "No species can survive a Class 14 Deathworld, let alone build cities. The data is real." A scientist replied, "The planet has an intelligent species, and they have space technology." Murmurs filled the room. If this species had spaceflight, it meant they were capable of leaving their planet. And if they came from such a hostile world, how dangerous would they be? "Have they made contact with any other civilizations?" someone asked. "Not that we know of," another scientist answered. "But their signals indicate they are capable of interstellar communication." A deep silence followed. This was a turning point. They could ignore the planet, pretend it didn't exist, or they could take the risk and make contact. Zell stood up. "We must know who they are." The council leader, an elder being with silver skin, finally spoke. "Very well. We will send a diplomatic team. We will ask them their name." The journey to the unknown. A fleet of sleek, silver ships cut through space, heading toward the Deathworld. Inside the lead vessel, Cell and his team watched as the planet grew larger on the screens. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Deep blue oceans, vast green lands, but storms raged across its surface. "This place is madness," Vera whispered. Cell agreed. But the most shocking part was the artificial satellites orbiting the planet. The inhabitants had already mastered space travel. They sent a message, the universal greeting of the Galactic Union. "To the inhabitants of this world, we come in peace. We seek to learn your name." Seconds passed, then minutes. The tension in the ship was heavy. What if the inhabitants were hostile? What if they didn't understand? Then finally, a response came. A single word, spoken in a confident voice. "Welcome to Earth." The entire crew froze. Earth? The name was unfamiliar, yet the way it was spoken carried weight, as if it was something undeniable. Zell felt a chill. They had found a Deathworld. But more importantly, they had found its rulers. The words echoed through the ship's communication system. "Welcome to Earth." Zell and his team sat in stunned silence. The voice was calm, steady, too steady for a species that had just received a message from alien visitors. There was no panic, no confusion. It was as if they had been expecting this moment. Vira was the first to break the silence. They understood us." Zell nodded slowly. "Not just that. They speak our trade language perfectly." The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Most civilizations struggled with first contact. There was fear, hesitation. But these humans, as the database now identified them, were different. They responded immediately and without fear. A second message followed. "Do you come in peace?" The diplomatic officer, a small, soft-spoken being named Halleck, took a deep breath before responding. "Yes, we are explorers from the Galactic Union. We wish to learn about your world." There was another pause. Then a new reply. "Very well. You are welcome. But be careful, our world is not kind to visitors." Zell felt an uneasy weight settle in his chest. He had visited hundreds of planets, spoken to dozens of species. Never before had a civilization warned them about its own home. Descending to the Deathworld, the shuttle detached from the main ship and began its descent toward the surface. From above, Earth looked beautiful but dangerous. Violent storms raged over the oceans, snow-covered mountains stretched into the clouds, and massive forests sprawled across the land. As they entered the atmosphere, the ship shook violently. Turbulence battered the hull, lightning flashed nearby, and strong winds pushed against them. The pilots struggled to keep the ship steady. "This planet is alive," Vera muttered, gripping her seat. "More than alive," Cell responded. "It's fighting us." But then, suddenly, the storm ended. They broke through the clouds and saw a massive city below. Bright lights, towering buildings, and flying vehicles filled the landscape. It was nothing like what they had expected from a Deathworld. Their shuttle landed in a secure zone, where a group of humans waited. They wore uniforms, not armor, but something official. They weren't afraid. Instead, they stood tall, watching with curiosity. As the doors opened, Cell stepped out first, followed by Talek and Vera. The human at the front, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Welcome to Earth," he repeated. "I am Daniel, a representative of our world." Cell noticed how Daniel studied them, not with fear, but with interest, as if they were equals. "We are honored to be here," Talek said, bowing slightly. Daniel nodded. "You must have questions." Cell hesitated before speaking. "Your world is unlike any we have encountered. How did your people survive here?" Daniel smiled, but there was something behind his eyes, something deep, something old. "We didn't just survive," he said. "We adapted." A history of hardship. The humans led them into a large building where a holographic map of Earth was displayed. It showed deserts, jungles, mountains, and frozen wastelands. Every part of the planet looked extreme. Daniel gestured toward the map. "Our world is violent. Earthquakes, storms, deadly animals, diseases. Everything here fights against life. We should not have survived." Talek frowned. "Then how did you?" Daniel's expression did not change. "Because we refused to die." A silence followed. Zell looked at the images of towering volcanoes, massive hurricanes, and vast, empty deserts. Any one of these would have destroyed a lesser species, but the humans had built cities on top of them. "You don't just live here," Vera whispered. "You conquered this world." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yes, and we learned something important." He turned back to them, his voice calm but firm. "If we can survive Earth, we can survive anywhere." Zell sat in silence, processing Daniel's words. "If we can survive Earth, we can survive anywhere." It wasn't a boast. It was a fact, spoken with the confidence of someone who had lived through hardship and come out stronger. Talek and Vera exchanged uneasy glances. Every world they had visited followed the same pattern. Intelligent species rose from safe, stable environments. But here was a species that had done the impossible. Zell cleared his throat. "You say your world is dangerous, yet you have built great cities. You have mastered technology. How?" Daniel leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Because we had no choice. Everything on Earth is a challenge. If we did not adapt, we would be extinct." He pressed a button, and the holographic map shifted. It now displayed ancient history, ruined cities, collapsed civilizations, massive disasters. This is what happens when we are not prepared, Daniel continued. We have lost entire nations to the fury of our world. But we learned. We rebuilt. Every time the planet knocked us down, we stood up again. Vyra whispered, "And you call this home?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes, because Earth made us strong." The walk through the city. The humans led them outside. The city was vast, filled with towering buildings and flying vehicles. People walked the streets, moving with purpose. Some wore thick coats to protect themselves from the cold air. Others carried devices that displayed glowing screens of information. But what stood out most was the way they moved. They were not slow or cautious, like species from safer worlds. They walked with confidence, head high, eyes scanning their surroundings. Even the smallest child seemed aware of their environment. Cell whispered to Talik, "They are always ready." Talik nodded. "For what?" "For anything," Cell replied. As they moved deeper into the city, they saw statues and monuments. Some honored great leaders, others scientists and explorers. But many depicted something different. People struggling through storms, climbing mountains, and pushing forward against impossible odds. Vera stopped in front of one. It showed a man, covered in heavy gear, standing against fierce winds on a frozen peak. A small plaque read, "We go where others cannot." Daniel noticed their interest. "That's one of our explorers. He climbed the highest mountains on Earth, alone, just to prove it could be done." Zell frowned. "Why take such risks?" Daniel's expression didn't change. "Because we must. If we stop pushing forward, we become weak. And on Earth, weakness means death." Zell exchanged glances with his team. The more they learned, the more they realized how different humans were from any other species. A dangerous welcome. Their tour continued. As they reached an open plaza, the sky suddenly darkened. Heavy clouds rolled in, and cold wind rushed through the streets. A siren blared. Storm warning. Zell's team tensed. On most worlds, people would panic and seek shelter immediately. But the humans? They simply adjusted. People pulled up hoods, secured their coats, and carried on as if nothing had changed. Shops closed their doors, lights turned on, and vehicles shifted to safer routes. No fear, no hesitation, just adaptation. Vera shook her head in disbelief. A storm comes, and they don't run. Daniel chuckled. "This is a mild one. If we stopped for every storm, we'd never get anything done." Zell turned his eyes to the sky. Lightning flashed in the distance, but Daniel didn't even flinch. Humans did not fear their world. They had mastered it. For the first time, Zell felt something unexpected. Not fear, not concern. Respect. The storm raged above, dark clouds swirling as cold winds howled through the city streets. Sale and his team watched in disbelief as the humans continued their daily activities. Some adjusted their clothing. Others walked faster. But no one panicked. No one ran for shelter in fear. They adapted, as if this was normal. Vyra wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "This is a mild storm." Daniel nodded, completely unaffected. "Yes, we get worse." Zell had visited many planets where storms of this magnitude would cause complete shutdowns. Some species would even abandon entire regions if the weather was too hostile. But here, humans kept moving. Talik observed the people. "Your kind does not fear nature." Daniel turned to him with a small smile. "Fear? No, we respect it, but we do not let it stop us." Zell's mind raced. He had studied hundreds of civilizations, and all followed a similar pattern. When faced with extreme environments, species either migrated or avoided danger. Humans did neither. They conquered. Survival through strength. As they continued their tour, the storm intensified. Heavy rain began to fall, pattering against the ground. Yet the city's streets remained active. Vehicles adjusted speeds, buildings lit up, and businesses remained open. A large screen on one of the buildings caught Cell's attention. It displayed news updates about an incoming blizzard in another part of the world. Instead of warnings to flee, there were guides on how to prepare, how to endure, how to keep moving. Cell turned to Daniel. Do your people ever consider leaving this world? You have space travel. Surely you could find a gentler home. Daniel chuckled. And do what? Sit under the sun in perfect comfort and grow weak. He shook his head. No, Earth made us who we are. We won't abandon it. Talek frowned. But your world fights against you. Daniel's expression became serious. And that's why we are strong. He gestured toward a statue in the plaza, half covered in rain. It depicted a group of figures pulling another up from the edge of a cliff. We struggle, Daniel continued. But we struggle together. That is why we survive. Zell stared at the statue. It wasn't just about one person overcoming hardship. It was about helping others survive too. This was different from other species, who relied on strict hierarchies or cold efficiency. Humans fought for each other, and that made them even more dangerous. Humanity's painful past. They entered a grand building, its walls lined with historical images and records. Daniel led them to a large display, showing ancient wars, great disasters, and civilizations that had risen and fallen. Vyra hesitated. So much destruction. How did your species not break? Daniel exhaled, looking at the images. Because we refused to. He pointed at a section showing vast ruins. Every time we were knocked down, we rebuilt. Every time nature or war tried to wipe us out, we came back stronger. Zell studied the display carefully. Most species would have perished under such conditions. Humanity had suffered countless disasters, yet here they stood, thriving, expanding into space. Vyra turned to Daniel. Your world is cruel. Your history is painful, but you do not seem bitter. Daniel looked at her with calm eyes. Pain is a great teacher, and we have learned well. Talek whispered, You are not like any species we have met before. Daniel smiled. I know. Zell finally spoke. Perhaps that is why we are here. Daniel nodded. Yes, and now that you know about us, you must decide. Decide what? Talek asked. Daniel's voice was steady. Whether you see us as allies or as something to fear. Zell didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure. Zell and his team stood in silence. Daniel's words lingered in their minds. You must decide whether you see us as allies or as something to fear. The humans had survived a world that should have killed them. They had endured disasters, wars, and extreme conditions, and yet they thrived. This was not normal. No other species had done this. Vera shifted uncomfortably. What if we see you as both? Daniel chuckled, but there was no arrogance in his voice. That would be wise. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. But even now, the city did not stop. Zell's mind raced with questions. What drives your people to keep pushing forward? Most species seek comfort, stability. But you. He gestured toward the city, the monuments, the history. You choose struggle. Daniel crossed his arms. Because without struggle, we wouldn't be who we are. Hardship forces us to grow. Talek frowned. But wouldn't it be easier to avoid hardship? Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Once we believed that too. We thought we could control nature, avoid war, create a world without suffering. But the universe does not allow such things. He turned toward a large display screen. It showed a vast, ruined city, an old war zone, burned and broken. This is what happens when we grow soft, he said. We forget how fragile peace is. We forget that survival must be earned. Zell stared at the image. The humans had not just survived Earth, they had survived themselves. A dangerous kindness. As they continued their tour, Zell noticed something else, something unexpected. Despite their hardships, Humans were not cold. They saw a man helping an elderly woman cross a flooded street. A group of people shared food with those in need. Workers repaired broken structures together, laughing as they worked through the rain. Humans were kind. Vira whispered, "How can a species so strong be so caring?" Daniel smiled, because strength without compassion is meaningless. Zell exchanged a glance with Talek. In most advanced civilizations, power often led to cruelty. Yet here were the strongest beings they had ever met, offering warmth, support, and unity. Talek shook his head in disbelief. "You are warriors, yet you protect the weak. You are survivors, yet you help each other." He hesitated before adding, "You are dangerous, yet you choose peace." Daniel nodded. "That is our way." Zell felt a deep respect growing within him. The Galactic Union had feared this species upon learning of their Deathworld. But now, Zell feared what would happen if anyone made them an enemy. Because if humans ever had to fight, they would not stop. The test of trust. As the storm finally began to calm, Daniel led them toward a massive structure, one of Earth's spaceports. Hundreds of ships stood ready for launch. Some were small and sleek, meant for short travel. Others were massive, built for long journeys beyond the stars. Zell's eyes widened. "You are already expanding into the galaxy." Daniel nodded. "Slowly, but yes. We are explorers, just like you." Vira looked uneasy. "What if the galaxy is not kind to you?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Then we will do as we always have. We will endure." Zell took a deep breath. The Galactic Union had feared the unknown, but now they had a choice. Would they embrace these humans as allies, or would they try to control them, and risk making an enemy they could never defeat? As he looked at Daniel, at the strength in his eyes, Zell knew the answer. They would not fear humanity. They would respect them. Zell stood in the spaceport, watching the humans move with purpose. Engineers repaired ships, pilots ran diagnostics, and workers loaded supplies. Every movement was efficient, calculated, but not rushed. There was no hesitation, no confusion. Humans knew what they were doing. Talek observed them closely. They worked like a military force, even in daily tasks. Daniel, standing beside them, chuckled. "Not military, just prepared." Vira frowned. "Prepared for what?" Daniel's expression turned serious. "For whatever comes next." Zell studied the massive ships around them. Some were clearly built for exploration, but others looked different. Stronger, heavily reinforced. "These ships," Zell said slowly, "they are not all for peaceful missions, are they?" Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "No, some are built for defense." A cold realization settled in Zell's mind. The humans were already thinking ahead. They had not yet fully entered the galactic stage, but they were preparing for war if necessary. Zell turned to him. "Who do you expect to fight?" Daniel's voice was calm. "Anyone who tries to take our freedom." The answer was not a threat. It was simply the truth. The weight of history. Daniel led them through the spaceport, past a series of large banners displaying historical moments. One image showed the first moon landing. Another depicted a team of astronauts working on a space station. And then there was a darker image, a massive explosion in space, a destroyed ship floating in the void. Vera stopped. "What is this?" Daniel exhaled. "A lesson." He pointed at the image. "This was one of our first deep space missions. A failure. The crew died." Talek looked shocked. "And you kept going?" Daniel nodded. "We grieved. We learned. And we tried again." Zell shook his head in disbelief. Most species would have stopped after such a disaster. But not humans. Failure did not break them. It made them stronger. The warning. As they moved toward the exit, Daniel stopped and turned to Zell. His expression was unreadable. "You've seen our world," he said. "You understand what we are." Zell nodded slowly. You are survivors. Daniel's eyes darkened. We are more than that. Zell frowned. Then what are you? Daniel looked directly at him. His voice was calm, steady, unshakable. We are the storm. Silence filled the air. Zell finally understood. The Galactic Union had feared the wrong thing. Earth was a death world. That was true. But the true danger was not the planet. It was the people who had mastered it. Zell could not shake Daniel's words. We are the storm. It was not arrogance. It was not a threat. It was a simple truth. Humans had survived the worst conditions imaginable. They had endured nature's fury, their own conflicts, and the cold silence of space. And through it all, they had not broken. They had become something stronger. Zell exchanged glances with Talik and Vera. The Galactic Union had always assumed that the deadliest worlds would never create intelligent life. But here stood the exception, a species born from struggle, yet filled with kindness and resilience. A dangerous combination. Leaving Earth behind, Daniel led them toward their ship, the rain now reduced to a soft drizzle. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of wet earth and metal. Zell took one last look at the human city. Even after the storm, people had already returned to their routines. Workers cleared debris, shops reopened, and life continued as if nothing had happened. Other species would have taken days to recover. Humans, they adapted instantly. Talik whispered, I wonder, if their world had been peaceful, would they still be this strong? Vera shook her head. No, Earth made them what they are. Zell nodded, and that was what made them so unique. As they stepped onto their ship, Daniel spoke one last time. I know why you came here, Zell. Zell turned to him, surprised. You do. Daniel gave a small smile. The Galactic Union fears us. They sent you to decide if we are a threat. Silence. Finally, Zell sighed. Yes. Talik and Vera looked uneasy, but Daniel simply nodded. Then tell them the truth. Zell hesitated. And what is the truth? Daniel's eyes were steady. We are not looking for war. But if one comes to us, his voice was quiet but firm. We will not lose. The decision. As their ship lifted off, Zell watched Earth grow smaller. Vira's voice broke the silence. What do we tell the Union? Zell exhaled slowly. We tell them. He paused, thinking carefully. That humanity is not to be underestimated. Talik nodded. And if they do? Zell looked out into space toward the endless stars. Then may the stars have mercy. The Galactic Union's Grand Hall was silent. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in their seats, waiting for the report. Zell stood at the center, his hands resting on the data pad containing everything he had learned about Earth and its people. The High Counselor, a tall, silver-skinned being named Varen, leaned forward. Ambassador Excel, you have spent weeks among the humans. Now, tell us, do they pose a threat? Zell looked around the room. Many species here had lived in comfort for millennia. They had built their civilizations in stable environments, free from the chaos of death worlds. They did not know true struggle, not like the humans. He took a deep breath. Humans are not conquerors. They do not seek war. The room remained silent. Some representatives relaxed. Others looked skeptical. But Zell continued, his voice steady. If war comes to them, they will not surrender. They will fight until the end. A murmur spread through the hall. Some whispered among themselves, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Varen frowned. Are they a danger to the Union? Zell chose his words carefully. They are a danger only if we make them one. Varen's expression darkened. Explain. Phil stepped forward. Humans have survived a world that would kill most of us. They have endured disasters, war, and hardships beyond anything we have experienced. And yet, they are not ruthless. They value peace, but they are not weak. They are kind, but they will not be taken advantage of. He paused before adding, "If we stand with them, they will be our greatest allies. But if we push them, if we threaten them, we may awaken something we cannot control." Silence filled the hall. Finally, a reptilian ambassador hissed, "Are you saying we should fear them?" Zell shook his head. "No, I am saying we should respect them." Varen narrowed his eyes. "And what of their technology? Are they advanced enough to challenge us?" Zell hesitated, then answered honestly, "Their ships are not as advanced as ours. Their weapons are powerful, but not beyond what we have seen." Varen leaned back. "Then why should we be concerned?" Zell's next words sent a chill through the room. "Because technology does not win wars. Willpower does." The choice. The High Council spent hours debating. Some believed humanity should be welcomed. Others argued that they were unpredictable and too dangerous to join the Union. Finally, Varen turned back to Excel. "What is your recommendation?" Zell exhaled. "We have two choices. We can treat them as equals and work together to shape the future." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Or we can push them aside, out of fear. But if we do, if we ever make the mistake of turning them into an enemy." His voice was quiet but firm. "Then may the stars have mercy on us all." The hall fell into silence once more, because for the first time, the Union understood. This was not just another species. This was humanity. The Galactic Union had never faced a decision like this before. Hundreds of species had joined over the centuries, but none had been like them. None had come from a death world. None had faced extinction so many times and still stood strong. And now, humanity stood at the gates of the stars, waiting for an answer. Would the Union accept them, or would fear decide their fate? The verdict. Zell stood before the High Council, his heart heavy. He had done everything he could. He had told them the truth about humanity, their kindness, their strength, their unbreakable spirit. Now it was out of his hands. Varen, the High Counselor, rose from his seat. His silver eyes scanned the room before he spoke. "The Union has decided." Silence filled the hall. Even the most restless representatives sat still. Varen's voice was calm, measured. "Humanity shall be invited to join the Galactic Union as allies." A murmur spread through the hall, some in agreement, some in disbelief. Zell let out a quiet breath. They had chosen wisely. But Varen was not finished. He turned to Excel. "And what do they call their world?" Zell blinked. "Their world." Varen nodded. "We classified it as a Class 14 death world. But surely the humans have their own name for it." Zell's mind drifted back to his time on Earth. The storms, the hardships, the unbreakable people who refused to surrender. He remembered standing beside Daniel, looking over the city, hearing the weight in his voice when he spoke of their home. Zell took a deep breath and spoke. "They call it Earth." A ripple went through the hall. The name was simple, unassuming, yet now it carried weight. Because now they knew the truth. Earth was not just a death world. It was the home of the most resilient species the galaxy had ever known. The storm walks among the stars. As Zell returned to his ship, a message from Daniel awaited him. It was short, but the meaning was clear. "We will not disappoint." Zell smiled. He knew they wouldn't, because humans never back down. They had survived the impossible before, and now they would walk among the stars, not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as something far more dangerous, a species that refused to be broken. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The end.